Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be comparing my Rolex Submariner 124060 with my WR4K Ironwatch RX8004-B. Firstly, let's consider the price difference between the two pieces. The current grey market value of the Submariner is €14,000 on Chrono24. The current price of the WR4K is €350 on AliExpress. So a massive price difference between these two pieces. But nonetheless, we're going to compare them side by side, and that starts off with us looking at the watch boxes. The Submariner watch box is protected by this magnolia cardboard outer box with a coronet embossed. So although basic, it does suffice in protecting the watch box. The Ironwatch Watchbox is protected by cardboard as well. It's a cardboard sleeve, so really there isn't that much difference between the protection of the watch boxes, a cardboard box versus a cardboard sleeve. Now, with regards to the watch boxes, this is the Submariner watch box. Yes, it is aesthetically pleasing with the embossed Rolex coronet in gold, but what it comes down to is this. This is a plastic watch box which is coated with vinyl plastic. It doesn't really say to me high tier piece. This doesn't say to me €14,000 Submariner. I would like to see Rolex improve the quality of their watch boxes and use solid wooden watch boxes. For example, I recently reviewed the Monta Ocean King, and that came in a solid wooden watch box which was piano lacquered to a flawless finish. That to me says luxury. And bear in mind that is a mid-tier piece. It's not a high-tier piece costing €14,000. So I really dislike this plastic watch box coated in vinyl plastic. I think it's a disappointment. If it were genuine leather, if this green was genuine leather and not just grained vinyl plastic, then yes, I would say it is aesthetically pleasing. So hinge lid to the watch box, and as you can see, the interior is finished to a high standard as one would expect. So let's compare it to the Ironwatch watch box. As I said, what it comes down to is this is a plastic watch box also coated in vinyl plastic. Really the only difference between these two is this is a large watch box and this is a smaller one. It has a hinged lid just the same, and the interior is also finished to a high standard, and the watch sits on a padded pillow cushion just like the Rolex does. So I'll just take it out and show it to you. So if you look at it, really there isn't that much difference. This one is coated in vinyl plastic, this one is upholstered with a velour fabric, but with regards to presentation, it's very similar between the two. Now, this watch is €14,000, this is €350, so massive price difference. But the only real difference between the watch boxes is the proportions. The actual quality of the materials used, it's the same. Plastic watch boxes coated in vinyl plastic. So let's look at the items one gets with the two watches. With the Submariner, one gets this leather wallet and it has a plastic guarantee card. Now, with the Ironwatch, one also gets a similar plastic guarantee card. There's no leather wallet, but the reverse is filled in with the serial number, reference number of the piece and the date of purchase. So the truth is, looking at them side by side, again, there isn't that much difference between the two pieces. One gets a plastic warranty card and a plastic warranty card. The Rolex warranty card is activated for 5 years electronically. There is a microchip inside, and therefore that is superior, but the reality is they both come with warranties, and these plastic warranty cards both do the same job in effect. Now, on the reverse of the leather wallets, we have the worldwide service guarantee booklet, and with the Ironwatch, that is included in the user's manual. It covers both the terms and conditions of the worldwide guarantee and also the owner's instructions. Now, looking at the Submariner, you can see the owner's instruction manual is very similar. They both are even similar size and thickness, both have a similar number of pages. They both have clear, concise diagrams, and the instructions are in English. In fact, the Ironwatch is superior because it's bilingual, both in Mandarin and also English, whereas the Submariner and Submariner Date owner's instruction manual is only in English. They produce a different one of these for each country that the watch is sold in. So really, there isn't that much difference in the two instruction booklets. As you can see, the owner's manuals, they really are very similar. Now, with regards to the other accessories, both watches come with plastic tags. Now, the Rolex tag is the superlative certified tag. It has a hologram in the center, but what it comes down to is it's a fabric tag, and we've got a plastic tag on the end of it. As you can see, this one also has a fabric cord on it, and it's a plastic tag. Really, there isn't that much difference. what I want you to consider is, this is the plastic tag one gets with a €14,000 watch. This is the plastic tag one gets with a €350 watch. Really, they're not that different. This doesn't say to me luxury. This actually says to me that it looks very close to luxury. So there isn't that much difference. Again, lastly, with the Submariner, one also gets the original Rolex price tag. And one also gets this plastic bezel protector. These are things that one doesn't get with the Ironwatch. So, just looking at the packaging, the accessories and the watch boxes, as you can see, there really isn't that much difference. And I think Ironwatch deserve full credit for producing good quality accessories and a good quality watch box for €350. Rolex really deserve full criticism for producing a low quality watch box and accessories, bearing in mind it's a high tier piece. Right, so now on to the watches themselves. So, firstly, let's talk about the specification. The Submariner has 300 meters of water resistance. The WR4K has 200 meters. So clearly the Submariner is a technically superior piece. It has 100 meters of additional water resistance. They both have 120 click unidirectional bezels. They both have screw-down case backs, and they both have screw-down crowns. And they also have oyster bracelets, as you can see. Now, with regards to the clasp, clearly the Submariner has a better quality clasp, although they do look visually similar. The Submariner uses a glide lock. This is just a flip-lock clasp with 3 micro-adjustment positions internally. But in terms of the finishing, the quality of the brushed satin finishing, the luster of the 2 bracelets and clasps, they're actually very similar. The Submariner Oyster bracelet is made from 904L oyster steel. Now, the WR4K bracelet is made from 316L grade stainless steel. But if you actually look at the luster, there's no discernible difference between the two. I'm just going to tilt it in the light and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. When I tilt the oyster steel bracelet in the light, you can see the luster, you can see the grain of the 904L oyster steel has been brushed to a very fine finish, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. So that's 904L oyster steel. Now if you look at 316L grade oyster steel, you can see, although the brushed satin finishing isn't as fine as on the Submariner oyster bracelet, it is very high grade on the Ironwatch, and there is no discernible difference visually. If you look at the colour tone of the 904L and you look at the colour tone of the 316L grade stainless steel, they look exactly the same. One doesn't look more silver, one doesn't look more grey, one doesn't look more glossy or matte. They both look exactly the same. And really the Submariner is a disappointment because this is a high tier piece versus a low tier piece. But if you look at the bracelets side by side, if you look at the luster of the 2 bracelets, they actually look very similar. And I would say that this Submariner is disappointing because one should expect a high tier piece to look much better than a low tier piece. But as you can see, look at the sheen, look at the luster of the 904L on the left compared to the 316L on the right. They look exactly the same. Now the build quality of the oyster bracelet on the Submariner is better. The fit of the end links, the finishing is of a higher grade as one would expect. The articulation of the links and the screw pins is done to perfection. But in terms of the actual finishing of the surfaces, the brushed satin finishing is higher grade on the Submariner, but it's not high enough to justify the €14,000 grey market value. Flawless mirror polishing to the flanks. But if we look at the WR4K, that also has very high quality brushed satin finishing to the top side, underside, and we also have flawless mirror polishing to the flanks. So very similar. They both use screw pins in the bracelets. Yes, one could argue the fit of the end links isn't as good on the WR4K, and the articulation of the links isn't as good. It's not as silky smooth, but the screw pins are actually very well fitted to the bracelet. So let's look at the clasp. This is the flip-lock clasp used in the Ironwatch, and as you can see visually it looks very similar to the internals of the glide lock. Flawless mirror polishing to the top side, underside and flank. So let's compare that to the glide lock on the Submariner. As you can see visually it looks exactly the same quality of flawless mirror polishing. Now the Submariner is engraved of course, which is more aesthetically pleasing, but in terms of the actual execution of the polishing, there really isn't that much difference between the two, and I think Ironwatch deserve full credit because what they've done is they've copied the execution, they've copied the design, the build quality of the glide lock. If you look at the glide lock on the left and you look at the WR4K flip lock on the right, In terms of the finishing, the mirror polishing, there isn't actually that much difference. Yes, one could argue this Submariner is better finished, but however, the WR4K isn't that far away from it. It actually looks visually very similar. Now, one detail I want to give due credit to Ironwatch for is if you look closely on this glide lock, the lock has a spring-loaded mechanism, and this is something that many homages to the Submariner and Submariner dates don't get right. They don't have this spring-loaded action, it's fixed. For example, on a Pagani design PD1661, which you'll all be familiar with, this is fixed. It doesn't have that spring-loaded action, it's not spring-loaded on the flip-lock clasp used on the Pagani design. However, on the Ironwatch, it is spring-loaded, as you can see. And it actually feels very similar to the spring-loaded action of the lock on the Rolex Glide Lock. In terms of resistance, it's got a nice firm resistance to it. Now, the positive benefit of that is when one closes the flip-lock clasp, it's got a nice positive click. And I absolutely love this. This is something that many homages to the Submariner don't get correct. For example, I've previously reviewed the Pagani design PD1661, the Kronos L6005, and the San Martin SN01, the SN017G and the SN019G. They don't get this correct. But if I compare it to the glide lock mechanism on my Submariner, it actually feels very similar. It's got that same reassuring positive click, and that comes from the spring-loaded action of the glide lock. If you look closely when I close it, you can see it's got that click. And I really like this about the Ironwatch because they've actually done a very good job of replicating it. It's got a very similar spring-loaded action. Nice firm resistance. It doesn't feel sloppy. It's a nice tight fit in the body. The spring-loaded action is very firm, just like the glide lock. And it snaps shut, just like the glide lock. So for a €350 piece, this clasp is really excellent quality. No sharp edges, no sharp burrs. The finishing to the flanks, flawless mirror polishing. The brush satin finishing has a beautiful luster. The only real negative to it is that it doesn't have a diver's extension, and of course it doesn't have the glide lock mechanism. We just have 3 dimples of micro adjustment in the underside. Now if you look at the glide lock, of course that's superior because we don't have a diver's extension, but what we do have is the glide lock mechanism. And this is something that Rolex do very well. The glide lock works very well. It's silky smooth and it clicks with a nice positive click and also deploys with a nice positive click. So really the glide lock is one of the best micro adjustment systems in the world, and I really like it. But the point is, this is the best quality finishing of the glide lock Rolex can come up with on the Submariner. Now if you actually look at the underside of it, the finishing is a disappointment. Just look closely at the internals of the glide lock. It's matte finish. This is die cast oyster steel. They haven't mirror polished it, and this is an area of the watch that should be mirror polished. It's an area that the collector will see. When you take the watch off the wrist to adjust the glide lock, you can visually see the internals of the glide lock, and as you can see they just leave it in a rough die cast finish. It's not mirror polished, it's not machined, and it actually looks quite rough. Now if you look at the internals of the micro adjustment clasp, this is actually finished to exactly the same standard on the WR4K. Yes, it's die cast and they mirror polish the externals and brush satin finish the externals, but the actual interior finishing on the WR4K is done to a high standard. It's die cast, it's deburred, there's no sharp edges, but visually it looks exactly the same as the internal to the glide lock. It's got that matte die cast finish, it's not mirror polished. And this is a main disappointment of the Submariner. They don't finish the clasp internally as well as one would expect with a high tier piece costing in excess of €10,000. Right, so let's move on to the bezel actions of the two pieces. So they both have 120 click unidirectional bezels, as one would expect. Right, so let's look at the Submariner first. Nice light resistance to it. Now, I actually dislike it. Now, that may come as a surprise to you, saying I dislike a Submariner bezel action. Needless to say, there is no lateral side-side play and there is no back play whatsoever, and perfect alignment, as one would expect with a high-tier piece. But however, the actual resistance of the 120 clicks feels too light. It's something I have always disliked about Submariner watches. I've owned several over the last 25 3 years of watch collecting. My first was a 14060M, and this is the current version, the 124060. I always think that the Bezel Action feels too light. Yes, it's even all the way through the 360 degrees, but I prefer a heavier ratcheting mechanism as per Seiko or the Steinhardt Ocean 139 or my WR4K. I like the heavy, loud, audible clicks, the heavy ratcheting mechanism, and the firmer resistance. With a Submariner, I always feel that the clicks are too fine. The 120 clicks feel too light, and they also feel too fine. They're not heavy and indexed. Now, the other thing I really dislike about the Submariner bezel itself, the oyster steel bezel, is the scallops on the teeth are too deep, and they're matte finished. They're not mirror polished. If you look closely at the internals of the scallops, they've left them brushed satin finished. They're not finished to a high standard one would expect with a high tip piece. I think it would look better if they were mirror polished. The actual scallops, I'm not talking about the top edge of the bezel, which is mirror polished. I'm talking about the scallops in the teeth. So they've left them matte finish. Now, the other thing I dislike about it is the actual teeth, the points of the teeth are very sharp. And the truth is, it doesn't make for a very pleasant user experience. When one has a bare finger, index finger and thumb operating the bezel, one can feel the sharp teeth digging into the skin. It doesn't feel comfortable to use. Now, of course, from a practical point of view, it does work very well, because the intention of the scalloped bezel is if one has wet hands, as per a diver, or wearing a rubber gloved hand, when the hand is slippy, one can still get a grip on the bezel. And the original intention of the Submariner was to be a dive piece, but in reality, divers now use dive computers. They don't use bezels on dive watches to time their dives. So the original intention was to make the bezel grippy when a hand was wet or when a diver was wearing a rubber glove, and therefore it was difficult to get a grip of the bezel. So it does work very well from the practical point of view. But the reality is, the majority of collectors don't use the Submariner as a dive piece. They don't take the watch anywhere near water, and therefore the teeth don't need to be as sharp. Yes, one could still make it look aesthetically pleasing with the scalloped teeth, but the truth is it just doesn't feel comfortable on the index finger and thumb. It feels sharp and it digs into the skin. So that's something I dislike about it. I would prefer heavier Bezel Action, and I would also prefer if the ratcheting mechanism was more indexed. One could feel the loud audible clicks. Now let's compare it to the WR4K. Much more satisfying. I like the loud audible clicks, and I like the firm resistance of it. It feels just like a Seiko SKX007 or a Seiko Turtle SRP777. Nice loud audible clicks. It feels similar to a Steinhardt Ocean 139, although lighter in resistance. It's even all the way through the 360 degrees. No lateral side-side play, no back play. And I like the heavier feeling of it. It's more satisfying. Now, the other thing I like about it is, as I've discussed, is the scallops to the teeth on the WR4K aren't as deep. They don't go the full depth of the bezel. I would actually argue it's more aesthetically pleasing with the smoother look to it, rather than having the full depth scallops. And it's just very aesthetically pleasing. Now, the other thing is, the teeth aren't as sharp. When I was talking about the Submariner bezel, the teeth being very sharp and digging into the index finger and thumb, this doesn't. It actually feels smoother. Now, it's still grippy. One can get a good purchase on it. One can feel the teeth. One can grip it with a wet hand or a gloved hand, which is the purpose of the scalloped teeth. But it just feels smoother. It doesn't feel as sharp with a bare finger and a bare thumb. One can actually feel the scalloped teeth. But the truth is, it's more pleasant to use. And the alignment is still perfect. And no lateral side-side play, no back play. I'll show you them side by side. So as you can see, look at the Submariner on top, and you can see the scallops to the teeth are deeper on the Submariner. But on the WR4K, the scallops to the teeth are slightly shallower, so it looks smoother. And the truth is, if I had to choose between the two, I actually prefer the sound of the WR4K bezel. The action in terms of the resistance, the ratcheting mechanism, I prefer the WR4K. And just the way they feel, I prefer the feeling of the WR4K bezel. It feels smoother. On the Submariner, it feels too sharp. And I don't like the light resistance of the Submariner bezel. I prefer the heavier resistance of the WR4K. So Ironically, the WR4K has a better bezel action in terms of the way it feels and the way it looks. Right, so let's test the crown actions. Now, this uses a triplock crown, which provides an effective hermetic seal to 300 meters. Absolutely silky smooth. This is just sublime. Really, I don't think Rolex can be beaten with regards to crown execution. The triplock crown is the best in the world. It's silky smooth. I've reviewed over 200 watches on my channel. Nothing comes close to a Rolex triplock. If you look at the coronets, you'll see there's 3 dots underneath the coronets. The 3 dots denote that it's triplock. If it has a line underneath the coronets, that denotes it's a twin lock crown. And the difference is the triplock crown has 3 hermetic seals, the twin lock crown has 2 hermetic seals, hence the name triplock or twin lock respectively. So silky smooth. In the first position, it's the manual wind position. And again, it feels absolutely silky smooth to manually wind it. One can feel the tension in the mainspring gradually building up in the caliber 3230, which is a chronology movement. Now, no date complications, so pulling it out to the first click position is the final click. That's the time setting position. Nice firm resistance to it. Now, there's one thing I dislike about it, and I've referred to this in my Datejust 41 review, which also uses a chronology movement, the caliber 3235. It's a curiosity of the chronology movements, the caliber 3235 and this caliber 3230. When I rotate the crown clockwise, it has the effect of rotating the hands anti-clockwise, which is the opposite way to the way one would expect. Usually with crowns, when one rotates it clockwise, it has the effect of rotating the hands the same way, clockwise. So it goes the opposite directions the way one would expect, and it's something I dislike about the chronology movements. The predecessor to this, the caliber 3130, had it the right way round. When one rotates the crown clockwise, it rotated the hands clockwise. So they reversed the gearing on the caliber 3235, and I actually think it's a mistake. It's not very pleasant to have to rotate the crown the opposite direction to the way you want the hands to go. Pushing it back in, it's got a nice positive click. Let's test screwing it back down. Immediate thread pickup. This is outstanding. It really is silky smooth. The threading is so silky smooth. I've never experienced anything like it. In all the 200 watches I've reviewed, none of them have come close. Only Rolex pieces with a twin lock or triplock crown can compete. So it's outstanding. It really is the very best crown execution in the world. So let's compare it to the WR4K. Very similar look to it. Coin edge finish, solid stainless steel, but it's unsigned. But let's test the action. Again, absolutely silky smooth. Now, the truth is, it's not as smooth as the triplock on my Submariner. It's not going to be. That just is impossible to replicate. But however, it does feel very smooth. And it is impressive, bearing in mind this is a low-tier piece at €350. So, in the first position, it's the manual wind position. And again, it feels very smooth to manually wind the PT5000. Now, I want to clarify something. Often the PT5000 has come in for undue criticism from collectors, and they've reported that it's very rough to manually wind. It feels like a Sellita SW200-1 or an ETA 2824-2. They're not particularly pleasant to manually wind. They can feel gritty, they can feel rough. Usually that's down to a lack of lubrication in the winding gear. This iron watch comes with a genuine HK precision technology PT5000. Often collectors purchase AliExpress watches with PT5000 movements made by other factories, and the problem with those PT5000s is they are not lubricated correctly. The winding gear in the movements is not lubricated, and therefore it feels gritty and it feels sandy in the movements. It feels like there's a lot of friction between the gearing because they lack lubrication on the teeth on the gears. As this is an HK Precision Technology PT5000 used in this piece, it feels silky smooth because the gears are well lubricated, as they should be. So this one is a pleasure to manually wind. Now, the PT5000 is a date complication movement, so the date wheel is present underneath the dial. Pulling it out to the first click position is a phantom date setting position. One has to pull it out to the second click position to get the time setting position. It does hack the movements. Lighter resistance to the PT5000, no backplay whatsoever. Feels like a good tight movement. One can feel the resistance of the gearing. I like it. It feels exactly the same as the SW200-1 and the ETA 2824-2. It's a clone of the latter. As one would expect, it feels exactly the same. 25 dual movement. Pushing it back in, it's got a nice positive click. Let's test screwing it back down. Again, immediate thread pickup. The internal thread interfaces very well with the external thread of the stainless steel crown tube. So, although it's not as silky smooth as the trip lock on the Submariner, it is an excellent crown execution. It is smooth. It's a pleasure to unscrew it, manually wind it, set the time, and also screw it back down. And it's one of the three elements I look at when I'm evaluating a watch. It should have excellent quality loom, bezel action, and crown execution. This does have all three key elements. So the truth is, there isn't a massive difference between the screw down crown on the WR4K and the trip lock crown on the Submariner. The Submariner has the edge over it. The trip lock does feel more silky smooth, but however, the WR4K isn't far behind it. So next, let's do a loom test, and we'll see how the loom performs on both pieces when they're charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge them both up to the absolute peak. Right, so the Submariner is now fully charged. Let's charge up the WR4K to the absolute maximum. Right, so they're now both fully charged, and I'm going to hold them side by side. So on the left we have the Submariner with chromolite, and on the right we have the WR4K, which uses BGW9 Superluminova Nova. Now, as you can see, there is no discernible difference between the performance of the chromolite on the left and the BGW9 on the right. They both have a very similar characteristic blue tone to them. Chromolite looks very similar in tone to BGW9. Looking at the ceramic bezel inserts, the loom pips are both very similar size. They're glowing very similar in terms of their brightness, and they will continue to glow for the same length of time. I personally prefer the Milsub style sword hands on the WR4K because they are larger. They allow for greater loom plots, greater area of BGW9 to be applied. I can clearly see on the WR4K there is 5 to 6 layers of BGW9 on the printed indices, the Milsub sword hands, and also the loom pip. Now, if you look at the performance of the two side by side, really there is no discernible difference. They are both glowing incredibly brightly, as one would expect with the chromolite because it's top grade. And if you look at the BGW9 on the right, it is equal in quality to the chromolites. There is no difference. They're both glowing exactly the same. The colour tone is very close. And this is something I want to give due credit to Ironwatch for. They haven't cut any corners with regards to the quality, the grade of BGW9 Superluminova Nova they're using. This is the kind of quality BGW9 one would expect to see on a high tier piece, costing in excess of €10,000. Bear in mind, the WR4K is a €350 low tier piece, but one is getting over €10,000 performance of BGW9. So as you can see, the BGW9 is still continuing to glow brightly. It's not fading fast as per a Pagani design which uses C3 Luminova, for example. And I think it's very impressive, and it's something I really like about the WR4K, the performance of the BGW9. And I really think they deserve due credit for this, because this is something one doesn't often see at €350. Yes, one will get good quality BGW9 on a Steinhardt Ocean 1, but that costs €450. It's not €350. So looking at them, as you can see, they are both looking exactly the same. I personally prefer the Milsub sword hands. This is subjective. Some collectors prefer the Mercedes hands of the Submariner, which are made from white gold. But if you look at the triangle on the WR4K on the 12 o'clock index, I would actually argue that the triangle is larger and more legible on the WR4K, and that is better than the Submariner maxi dial, which has white gold applied indices. So no difference whatsoever, and that may come as a surprise to you, because you would expect the Submariner, being a high tier piece, to have better loom performance than the WR4K. So I'll do a wrist shot of both pieces and you can see how they look, and I'll talk about how they feel on wrist. Now, one thing I want to discuss about this is the Oyster bracelet. Yes, it's very comfortable. The proportions are also very good because it's 21mm, which perfectly balances the 41mm head of the piece. But however, I want to level criticism at Rolex here, because when I purchased this piece with an 8-inch wrist, this felt too tight on my wrist. The correct sizing method for any watch bracelet, regardless of whether it's a Oyster style or Jubilee style bracelet, You should always be able to slide an index finger underneath a bracelet and clasp at all times. I've often discussed this in my reviews. Now, this Oyster bracelet was too tight on my wrist, and that negated having a glide lock mechanism. I couldn't actually use the glide lock because it was on maximum extension to get it to fit my 8-inch wrist. I had to visit an authorised dealer and get a link put into it, and I can now use the glide lock. It now has adjustment because, as you can see, there is enough slack on the bracelet. I can now move the micro adjustment of the glide lock in or out, which is what it's supposed to be like. So this will only fit you if you have up to a 7.5-inch wrist. If you want to use the glide lock with an 8-inch wrist, it will feel tight on wrist. Yes, for the majority of collectors it will fit. Now, with regards to proportions, yes, the 48mm lug-to-lug measurement is perfection personified. They have got the proportions of the case done to perfection. It is superior to the Submariner Super case used in the predecessor, the 114060, which I've previously owned. That had thick, square, block-like lugs and a 20mm lug width, and the 20mm to 16mm Oyster bracelet wasn't well balanced. It felt too top heavy, and it was something I disliked about the predecessor to this, the 114060. This 124060 is better proportions. The taper on the lugs is better done. The 41mm head of the piece better balances the 21mm bracelet. The comfort level of this is very good. It does feel balanced. It does feel like a balanced piece rather than being top heavy. It's very aesthetically pleasing. The feel good factor is good, and it's very well proportioned. It's low profile. The lug to lug measurement is good, and I really like the fit. The feel good factor and the fit of this piece is very good. So let's compare it to the WR4K. Now, this is a 39mm piece, but it wears more like a 40 due to the bezel being 40mm. There's a slight overhang on the bezel over the flanks of the case. So it's a 39, but it actually wears and looks like a 40 due to the 40mm bezel. Feel good factor, comfort level is exactly the same as a Submariner. Proportions are actually very similar, although this has more of a taper on the lugs due to being a 39mm case, and also has a smaller lug-to-lug measurement of 20. The taper on this bracelet is better proportioned than on the Submariner. The 20mm lug width tapers down to the flip-lock clasp, so it's a slimmer bracelet. The thickness of the links is the same, but the actual look of it is better because the taper on the lugs is more. Now, one detail I really like about this, and it's something I think Rolex made a mistake with when they changed from the classic 16610 case to the 1166610 case, is they deleted this chamfer on the edge of the case. If you look at this WR4K, you can see it has a nice bevel machined on the edge of the case. And the bevel on the edge of the case marks the transition between the top edge of the case and the flanks. And it was a detail on the classic Submariner 16610. It had that large characteristic bevel machined as per the Tudor Black Bay 58 and the Tudor Black Bay Heritage. Something I really like about the Black Bay, even though they have slab sides to the flanks. And it's just very eye-catching. I love that transition between the brushed satin finish to the tops of the lugs. One can see the grain of the stainless steel and the mirror polished flanks. So the contrast in finishes is broken up by that transitional line, the large bevel on the edge of the case. The truth is, this is as comfortable as a Submariner, and I actually prefer the proportions. I prefer the 39mm case with a 40mm bezel. It wears like a 40, and it feels exactly the same in terms of comfort level and feel good factor. So there's nothing between them in terms of how they feel to wear for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day. So I'll show you the two case backs and you can see the similarity. So the Submariner case back is made from solid oyster steel, brushed satin finish to the centre, mirror polished circumference, and it's also coin edge finished. It provides an effective hermetic seal to 300 metres. It's sterile. It's a very plain and boring case back to look at. This doesn't say to me high tier piece, it doesn't say to me luxury wristwatch. It's sterile and basic. I think that they should engrave the Rolex coronet or alternatively the specifications of the piece on the case back to add some interest to it. This really does look very boring and sterile. Now if you look at the Ironwatch, you can see it looks very similar. It's a sterile case back made from solid 316L grade stainless steel, same concentric finishing to it, the brushed satin finishing. And it's brushed satin finish throughout. There's no mirror polish section, but it also has a coin edge finish to it. So side by side, really they look very similar. If you look at this case back, it's finished to a very high standard, and it's a €350 watch. You look at this case back, it's also finished to a high standard, but really there isn't any discernible difference. The only difference is this case back has a mirror polished circumference to it, which really is a negligible difference. 300 meters versus 200 meters on the Ironwatch. So yes, the Submariner has a better hermetic seal. The case back withstands an extra 100 meters of water resistance, but the reality is no one is going to be using this for anything like 200 meters as a dive watch. And the reality is no one's going to be using the Submariner for anything like 300 meters as a dive watch. Commercial divers use dive computers. They're not going to be using a Submariner to time their dives. In terms of the finishing to the underside of the case, yes, it's finished to a flawless finish, and needless to say, the fit of the end links in the head of the piece is perfection. So the finishing is very good, but it's very boring, plain and sterile. And the finishing on the underside to the WR4K, the fit of the end links is also very good to the head of the piece. The brushed satin finishing to the underside of the case and the case back is all done to a very good standard. So really they're not that far apart in terms of the quality of the finishing of the two pieces. Right, so lastly, I'll summarise both pieces. What do I think of them overall? As always in my reviews, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet two criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So to evaluate both pieces, one needs to consider the three key elements, and they are loom performance, bezel action and crown execution. They are the three core elements that I look for in every watch I review. So the bezel action on both pieces is excellent, the crown execution is excellent, and the loom performance is excellent. However, the Submariner at €14,000 on the grey market really isn't a justified price. The truth is, I see the Submariner as a €2,000 watch. That is the true value of the watch. The main reason why it's a €2,000 watch, and the main reason why this is a €350 watch, is the movements used in both pieces. The caliber 3230 used in the Submariner is a far higher grade of movement. It's technically many levels above the PT5000, which is made by HK Precision Technology in China. But however, one has to consider the power reserves and the accuracy, and then one has to evaluate, well, is this worth paying €14,000 for on the grey markets? Is this worth paying €350 on AliExpress? This caliber 3230 has a 70-hour power reserve. The PT5000 in my WR4K has a 40-hour power reserve. So yes, the Submariner's 3230 has an additional 30 hours of power reserve. That is a very impressive achievement for an automatic watch. 70 hours is very good. In terms of accuracy, they're not that far apart. So this is currently running at plus 1 second per day when it's fully wound to its maximum for 70 hours. This is running at plus 3 seconds per day when it's fully wound to its maximum 40 hours. So although the caliber 3230 has 70 hours and the PT5000 has 40 hours, the accuracy is only 2 seconds per day difference. So really, the caliber 3230 isn't that impressive. It runs within the -2 to +2 seconds per day of COSC and Rolex's superlative chronometer accuracy. But the PT5000 is also regulated to within COSC chronometer limits of -4 to +6 seconds per day. The stated accuracy of the PT5000 made by HK Precision Technology is plus or minus 12 seconds per day, but the reality is they can often be regulated to within plus or 5 seconds per day. Ironwatch are using the genuine HK Precision Technology PT5000s, and they are regulating them very well, better than the plus or minus 12 seconds per day. They're often coming within plus or minus 5. Now this one is running at plus 3. So this is what you have to weigh up. You will get an extra 30 hours of power reserve with the Submariner, but with the WR4K, you're getting very close to the same accuracy. Plus 1 seconds per day with the Rolex, plus 3 seconds per day with the WR4K. The point is it really worth paying €14,000 just to have plus 1 second per day? You can pay €350 and get plus 3 seconds per day. Plus 3 per day is good enough accuracy for most collectors. So, lastly, I will summarise both pieces. What do I think of them? Well, yes, the Submariner is excellent quality. It is unquestionably excellent quality. Is it excellent value? No, it's not. It's actually very poor value. It's a €2,000 watch, which is retailed on the grey market for $14,000. So I would describe the Submariner as excellent quality but poor value. So is the WR4K excellent quality and excellent value? Yes, it is. At €350, this watch cannot be beaten. It is the ultimate Submariner homage. And I say that as someone who's got both of them in my hand. Side by side, I own both the watches. I've owned several Submariners over the last 23 years, and I can tell you that this WR4K is the best Submariner homage money can buy for €350. It's better than a Steinhardt Ocean 139, which is €450. It is better than the San Martin SN017G, the SN019G, and the Kronos L6005, which are your other considerations. Needless to say, the Pagani designed PD1661 cannot compete with the WR4K. It wouldn't be fair to compare them because the PD1661 is a €100 watch. This is a €350 watch, so it's several levels above it. But side by side, looking at them visually, they're not that different. Now, lastly, I just want to talk about the ceramic bezels because this is something that I really dislike about Rolex. The Cerachrom Bezel on a Submariner is made by heating up the Cerachrom to the very high melting point of 1600 degrees Celsius. And then what they do is they inlay platinum into the minute ticks and the Arabic numerals on the Cerachrom at 1600 degrees, and then they let it cool down. And the platinum particles are then bonded permanently to the Cerachrom. And the end products of all that is that one gets this matte silver finish to the platinum. It's not white paint, it's platinum. If you look at the minute ticks and the Arabic numerals, you can see they have this silver satin finish to them. I actually dislike it. I preferred the aluminium bezel inserts on the 16610 because the minute ticks and the Arabic numerals had a silver metallic finish, which was very eye-catching. Now, of course, the aluminium bezel inserts used on the classic Submariners weren't as scratch-resistant. Ceramic is more scratch-resistant. It's a harder material. But I dislike the use of platinum. It's completely pointless on a dive piece. It would actually be more clearly legible if they used white paint, as per the Pagani designed PD1661, which is ironic because that's a €100 watch. The truth is, I think the Cerachrom bezel would look better with white paint, or alternatively if they used Luminova, Super Luminova BGW9 for example, as per the Tudor Pelagos. I think the Pelagos ceramic bezel insert, which is fully loomed, is better done than the Cerachrom inlaid with platinum. Now, if you compare it to the WR4K ceramic bezel insert, this is just ceramic. They don't heat it up to 1600 degrees Celsius. They simply inlay it with paint. Now, if you look at the paint, it actually looks very similar to the platinum on the Submariner. And this is ironic because the white paint on the ceramic of the WR4K is significantly less expensive to produce than the platinum on the Cerachrom. But if you look at them visually, the minute ticks and the Arabic numerals, there's no discernible difference. I would actually argue in legibility that the WR4K is slightly better because it's whiter. If you look at the Cerachrom with platinum, it's got a more matte, dull silver tone. So I dislike the platinum used on the Cerachrom. I actually prefer the white paint used on the ceramic of the WR4K. I think the WR4K bezel, although very similar, is actually marginally better. So which one would you buy? Now, I own both, and I can say that this is a €2,000 watch. It's not worth €14,000. I think a better retail price for this piece would be €5,000. It really isn't worth more than that. This is worth €350. Every euro of it. You are getting a champagne watch for lemonade money. The PT5000 running at plus 3 seconds per day within chronometer accuracy limits is outstanding. And as I've discussed, the finishing, the build quality, the quality control is outstanding. And I actually think the WR4K is a better looking watch than the Submariner. And that may come as a surprise to you, but I actually prefer the WR4K visually. I prefer the mil sub hands. and I prefer the taper on the case, and most of all I like the large bevel on the edge of the case. The Submariner doesn't have it. If you look, it just has that sharp edge. The truth is the bevel on the WR4K case looks better done. So I hope you've enjoyed my review of my Submariner versus my WR4K. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you very much.